Translation. My dear Lord of the Vaikuntha planets, where there is no anxiety, my mind is extremely sinful and lusty, being sometimes so-called happy and sometimes so-called distressed. My mind is full of lamentation and fear, and it always seeks more and more money. Thus it has become most polluted and is never satisfied in topics concerning you. I am therefore most fallen and poor. In such a status of life, how shall I be able to discuss your activities? Would you like to repeat?
Yes.
My dear Lord of the Vaikuntha planets,
My dear Lord of the Vaikuntha planets,
where there is no anxiety,
where there is no anxiety,
my mind is extremely sinful and lusty,
my mind is extremely sinful and lusty,
being sometimes so-called happy and sometimes so-called distressed.
being sometimes so-called happy and sometimes so-called
My
distressed.
mind is full of lamentation and fear,
My mind is full of lamentation and fear,
and it always seeks more and more money.
and always seeks more and more money.
Thus it has become most polluted and is never satisfied in topics concerning you. I am therefore most fallen and poor. In such a status of life, how shall I be able to discuss your activities?
How shall I be able to discuss your activities?
Purport by His Divine Vaisesika Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki
Yeah.
Here Prahlad Maharaj represents himself as a common man, although he actually has nothing to do with this material world. Prahlad is always situated in the Vaikuntha planets of the spiritual world, but on behalf of the fallen souls, he asks how, when his mind is always disturbed by material things, he can discuss the transcendental position of the Lord. The mind becomes sinful because we are always engaged in sinful activities. Anything not connected with Krishna consciousness should be understood to be sinful. Indeed, Krishna demands in Bhagavad Gita 1866, Sarvadharman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarvapapebhyo mokshayishami ma shuchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. As soon as one surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of God, Krishna, Krishna immediately relieves one of the reactions of sinful activities. Therefore, one who is not surrendered to the lotus feet of the Lord should be understood to be sinful, foolish, degraded among men, and bereft of real knowledge because of atheistic propensities. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7:15. Namam dushkritina mudha prapadyante naradama maya pritigyana asuram bhavam ashrita. Therefore, especially in this age of Kali, the minds must be cleansed, and this is possible only by the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Chitadharvaramarjanam. In this age, the process of chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is the only method by which to cleanse the sinful mind. When the mind is completely cleansed of all sinful reactions, one can then understand his duty in the human form of life. The Krishna consciousness movement is meant to educate sinful men so that they may become pious simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Hare Nama, Hare Nama Eva Kevalam, Kalav Nasteva, 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 Gatiranyata. To cleanse the heart so that one may become sober and wise in this age of Kali. To become what in the age of Kali?
Wise.
Sober and wise. To cleanse the heart so that one may become sober and wise. Become what?
Sober and wise.
In this age of Kali, there is no value to any method other than the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Prahlad Maharaj has confirmed this process in previous verses. But Virya Gayana Mahamrita Mahmachitaha. Prahlad further confirms that if one's mind is always absorbed in the thought of Krishna, that very qualification will purify one and keep one purified always. To understand the Lord and his activities, one must free his mind from all contamination of the material world. And this one can achieve by simply chanting the Lord's holy name. Thus one becomes free from all material bondage. Om Adhyanatimidamdasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumidam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manodishta Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Padmayam Vidati Svatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Bhagavatam Shri Guru Vaisesika Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sarvekam Sarvajutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Bhagavan Sahana Lalita Shri Shamanandamscha Namamo Vishnupadaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaurani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Shikarine Namamo Vishnupadaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Namine Shri Varshavana Videvi Dainaya Kripadaye Krishna Sambandha Vidyana Daine Prabhave Namaha Madhuryo Jvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktya Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virbhava Siddhanta Dvandharine Namo Gorikishoraya Sajjad Vairagya Murtaye Vibrahamba Sambodhe Puranamujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sakchirananda Namine Gaura Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gaura Virvava Bhunesvam Nirveshta Sajjanamriya Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Shri Jagannathaya Te Namaha Vancha Bhadrarupascha Kripa Sindhu Vyaivacha Patitanam Bhavanyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishre Namaha Vanchatattva Krishna Bhaktarupa Sarupakam Bhaktavantakam Bhaktavyam Namami Bhaktashantikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jaya Namaskato Pangor Mama Manda Matergati Matsarvasvapadam Bojam Radha Madana Mohano Divya Vrindarayana Padmataha Srimad-Bhagavatam Vadasimhasanacham Srimad Radha Shila Govinda Deva Preshtalini Sevimanu Swanami Srimad-Bhagavatam Shivadatasaha Padarshan Medusvanir Gopir Gopinatha Shikesvanaha Tatchakam Shinagaurambi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishavanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vrindaya Yosidevaya Priyaya Vishwasya Vishnu Bhakti bhaktir bhavati naishtivi, tata rajastamo bhava, kamalobhadayashtaye, chetaitanavitram, stitam satye prasidati, evam prasanna manaso, bhagavad bhakti yogataha, bhagavad tattva vijnanam, buddhasangasya jayate, Chijante sarva samshaya, shiyante chasya karmani, krishnaiva manishvare. Vandana, Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Premanande Hare. Naitan manastata katasa vikundanatas ambriyate gurita masakatiram kamaturam harshashoka dhiyarshanartam tasmin gatam tadavatim vimrishami dhinaha. My dear Lord of the Vaikuntha planets, where there is no anxiety, my mind is extremely sinful and lusty, being sometimes so-called happy and sometimes so-called distressed. My mind is full of lamentation and fear, and it always seeks more and more money. Thus it has become most polluted and is never satisfied with topics concerning you, and therefore most fallen and poor. In such a status of life, how shall I be able to discuss your activities? Yesterday we talked about the process of mining sincerity from one's heart, and that this also requires the winnowing out of anarthas, unwanted desires and tendencies within the heart and mind. And this is called the process of anartha nivriti, or sloughing off of material desires and values in life. And this verse from Prahlad Maharaj's famous prayers is a very important verse, which is quoted by our acharyas, particularly Srila Jiva Goswami, who mentions it in his Bhakti Sandarbha. And it's a conundrum how one can, from a position of not having a taste, come to have taste. Because where do you begin? And Jiva Goswami points out that this verse gives us it presents that dilemma that Prahlad Maharaj is saying, how will I be able to discuss your topics if my mind is so much affected by material desires, and if I don't have a taste, how do I continue? The mind is certainly affected by sinful and lusty desires, and full of lamentation and fear, seeks so many material things, especially money, and it's polluted. So he's asking the question, in such a status of life, how shall I be able to discuss your activities? So as we just heard, Shushu Sharadhana Se Vasudeva Katharuchi Syad Mahatsevya Vidva Punya Tirtha Nishevana, continued by Srinvatam Swapata Krishna, etc., which says Suja Goswami says that Lord Sri Krishna, who is the Paramatma, the super soul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor, the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who relishes his messages, which are in themselves. But we have to be able to identify anarthas within the heart. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives the example of the gardener and compares the seed, the bhakti seed, or he compares the beginning of bhakti to the planting of a seed. And that seed grows up when watered properly with the Shravanadi Jal, that is the hearing and chanting and the other processes of devotional service, waters that seed, and it will grow from one's own heart through the different coverings of the universe, all the way past the Viraja River, the demarcation between the material and spiritual world, to the Goloka Vrindavan planet, and there, as a creeper is wont to do, entwine itself around the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. And then the devotee has dual citizenship. And this is indicated when Vidura first approaches Uddhava and asks him some questions about the Lord. Uddhava has to pull himself out of the spiritual world. You'll notice in a few shlokas that Uddhava has to struggle to come back to his material identity. In other words, he's walking around in this world, but he's really situated in the spiritual world simultaneously. This is altogether possible, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says to Sanatana Goswami, through the process of Shravana Nijal, of continuing to water the creeper of devotional service and allowing it to grow. So that's half the process, the watering. The other half is the weeding. One has to weed out unwanted creepers because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says they look very much like the bhakti creeper. And just as those who are gardeners know, little creepers grow up everywhere when you plant any kind of tomato, vegetables, and they often, in their infant stage, look just the same as the other. And a sloppy gardener who lets everything just grow will find out that these other plants tend to rob nutrients from the main plants that you're trying to grow. And they can also choke it off. They can take away its light, they can take away its root space and so forth. And so the gardener has to actively go out and take out those other types of weeds, those other weeds. The mantra, the Hare Krishna mantra, is mentioned in the Shastra, Nama Chintamani Krishna's Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha Purna Shruto Nityamukto Bhina Dvam Nama Namino. First of all, it says it fulfills all your desires. So any desire you have, it will fulfill. So if I'm maintaining material desires and I'm chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, it will fulfill my material desires. And also, if I make offenses while chanting, Haridas Thakur says, one of the results of chanting and making offenses at the same time is that one may get material opulence. And then someone might think, oh, look how successful this person is. But actually, this becomes a disqualification because the person becomes more and more attached to these things. So it requires some finesse to chant and also be very careful to weed out the anarthas. How do we do that? First of all, becoming aware of the various kinds of anarthas that might be present. And in the pastime of the cleansing in the Gunjicha temple, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu cleanses the temple very carefully. Once, twice, 3 times. First time he takes out the big things, pieces of straw, leaves, and so forth. The next time he takes out the smaller particles. And the third time, very fine, tiny pieces of dust, until the temple is shiny clean. And this is compared by the author, Kaviraj Goswami, to the process of cleansing the heart. One has to be very, very careful not to leave anything behind and think that's okay, because it's not. Actually, it's mentioned in the 5th canto of the Srimad-Bhagavatam that a practitioner of yoga may sometimes become lax and then forget that it's important to guard against material desires, and they can come back to pull the person away from devotional service. And he gives the example of a hunter who goes out and catches a wild animal and brings it back to his cozy little cabin, and he puts it in a cage. And he feeds it, and he talks to it, and after some time, it becomes apparently tame. And then one night, he doesn't think about locking the cage, because he thinks, well, he's a friendly little bear. And then in the night, the friendly little bear gets out, tears apart the whole house, and then kills the man. And similarly, if I think, oh, my material desires are tamed, I don't have to worry, and I leave and I'm lax about guarding against these material desires which can spring back, they can come back and destroy my devotional service at some point. I'm going to read a lengthy purport by Srila Prabhupada specifically about this topic. So we'll just please settle in and use full concentration to listen to this purport, because it will clarify many things about this process of anartha-nivritti. Emakto puradvar age patajata shakala shotila taha kevariba kata. Outside the gateway of the temple, that is the Gundicha temple, all the roads were also cleansed, and no one could tell exactly how this was done. Srila Prabhupada's purport. In commenting on the cleansing of the Gundicha temple, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as the world leader, was personally giving instructions on how one should receive Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, within one's cleansed and pacified heart. If one wants to see Krishna seated in his heart, he must first cleanse the heart, as prescribed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Shikshashtaka. Chetodarpanamarjanam. In this age, everyone's heart is especially unclean, as confirmed in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Hridyam taksto kipadrani. To wash away all dirty things accumulated in the heart, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised everyone to chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. The first result will be that the heart is cleansed. Chetodarpanamarjanam. Similarly, Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.17 confirms this statement. By the way, who's speaking now? Whose voice is this? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So Prabhupada is quoting his spiritual master in this passage. And now Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is quoting from a verse we just chanted in the invocation prayers. Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtanaha pratyam taksto hibadrani vidhunoti suhritsatam. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, supersoul in everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee, who relishes his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. If a devotee wants to cleanse his heart, raise your hand if you're in that category. I didn't get a full... Raise your hand if you're in that category. Thank you. If a devotee at all wants to cleanse his heart, he must chant and hear the glories of the Lord, Sri Krishna. Shrinvatam Sukata Krishna. This is a simple process. Krishna himself will help cleanse the heart because he is already seated there. Krishna wants to continue living within the heart, and the Lord wants to give directions, but one has to keep his heart as clean as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu kept the Gundicha temple. The devotee therefore has to cleanse his heart just as the Lord cleansed the Gundicha temple. In this way, one can be pacified and enriched in devotional service. If the heart is filled with straw, grains of sand, weeds, or dust, in other words, anyavilashita purna, one cannot enthrone the Supreme Personality of Godhead there. The heart must be cleansed of all material motives brought about through fruitive work, speculative knowledge, the mystic yoga system, and so many other forms of so-called meditation. The heart must be cleansed without ulterior motive. As Srila Rupa Goswami says, Anyavilashita shunyam jnana karma jnanavratam. In other words, there should not be any external motive. One should not attempt material upliftment, understanding the Supreme by speculative knowledge, fruitive activity, severe austerity and penance, and so on. All these activities are against the natural growth of spontaneous love of Godhead. As soon as these are present within the heart should be understood to be unclean and therefore unfit to serve as Krishna's sitting place. We cannot perceive the Lord's presence in our hearts, unless our hearts are cleansed. A material desire is explained as a desire to enjoy the material world to its fullest extent. In modern language, this is called economic development. An inordinate desire for economic development is considered to be like straws and grains of sand within the heart. If one is overly engaged in material activity, the heart will always remain disturbed. As stated by Narottam Das Thakur, Samsara Vishanale, Diva Nishi Hiya Jale, Judaiti na Kainu Upai. In other words, endeavor for material opulence is against the principle of devotional service. Material enjoyment includes activities such as great sacrifice for auspicious activity, charity, austerity, elevation to the higher planetary system, and even living happily within the material world. Modernized material benefits are like the dust of material contamination. When this dust is agitated by the whirlwind of fruitive activity, it overcomes the heart. Thus, the mirror of the heart is covered with dust. There are many desires to perform auspicious and inauspicious activities, but people do not know how life after life they are keeping their hearts unclean. One who cannot give up the desire for fruitive activity is understood to be covered by the dust of material contamination. Karmis generally think that the interaction of fruitive activities can be counteracted by another karma or fruitive activity. This is certainly a mistaken conception. If one is deluded by such a conception, he is cheated by his own activity. Such activities have been compared to an elephant's bathing. An elephant may bathe very thoroughly, but as soon as it comes out of the river, it immediately takes some sand from the land and throws it all over its body. If one suffers due to his past fruitive activities, he cannot counteract his suffering by performing auspicious activities. The sufferings of human society cannot be counteracted by material plans. The only way these sufferings can be mitigated is by Krishna consciousness. When one takes to Krishna consciousness and engages himself in the devotional service of the Lord, beginning with chanting and hearing the glories of the Lord, the cleansing of the heart begins. When the heart is actually cleansed, one can clearly see the Lord sitting there without any disturbance. In Srimad-Bhagavatam 9.468, the Lord confirms that he sits within the heart of the pure devotee. Sadhavo hridayam mayam sadhunam hridayam tvaham. Impersonal speculation, monism, merging into the existence of the Supreme, speculative knowledge, mystic yoga, and meditation are all compared to grains of sand. They simply cause irritation to the heart. No one can satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead by such activities, nor do we give the Lord a chance to sit in our hearts peacefully. Rather, the Lord is simply disturbed by them. Sometimes yogis and jnanis in the beginning take to the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra as a way to begin their various practices. But when they falsely think that they have attained release from the bondage of material existence, they give up chanting. They do not consider that the ultimate goal is the form of the Lord or the name of the Lord. Such unfortunate creatures are never favored by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for they do not know what devotional service is. Lord Krishna describes them in the Bhagavad Gita in this way. Tanaham dvishatak choran samsareshu naradaman shrupam ajasram ashupam asurasve viyonishu. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, I perpetually cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. By his practical example, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has shown us that all the grains of sand must be picked up thoroughly and thrown outside. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also cleansed the outside of the temple fearing that the grains of sand would again come within. In this connection, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explains that even though one may become free from the desire for fruitive activity, sometimes the subtle desire for fruitive activity again comes into being within the heart. Can somebody repeat that?
Some say,
Could you just repeat that last concept, please?
Subtle desires for fruitive activities coming back into the heart.
well,
Even after?
Cleansing it.
Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explains that even though one may become free from the desire for fruitive activity, sometimes the subtle desire for fruitive activity again comes into being within the heart. So, in other words, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu cleansed the temple and there was dust outside. He didn't want the dust to come back inside. It could come back in. As long as one is within the material world, there's danger. And at the moment I think I'm purified, I'm free, then I'm at the greatest risk of being recontaminated. I should be running scared the whole time. One often thinks of conducting business to improve devotional activity, but the contamination is so strong that it may later develop into misunderstanding, described as kutinati, fault-finding, and pratishtasha, the desire for name and fame and for high position. Jivahimsa, envy of other living entities. Nishadachar, accepting things forbidden in the Shastra. Kama, desire for material gain. And puja, hankering for popularity. The word kutinati means duplicity. As an example, at pratishtasha, one may attempt to imitate Srila Haridas Thakur by living in a solitary place. One's real desire may be for name and fame. In other words, one thinks that fools will accept one to be as good as Haridas Thakur, just because one lives in a solitary place. These are all material desires. A neophyte devotee is certain to be attacked by other material desires as well, namely desires for women and money. In this way, the heart is again filled with dirty things and becomes harder and harder, like that of a materialist. Gradually, one desires to become a repeated devotee or an avatar incarnation. He is also engaged in material activity. A devotee should never make compromises with non-devotees. By acting as a professional guru, mystic yogi, or miracle man, one may cheat and bluff the general public and gain fame as a wonderful mystic, but all this is considered to be dust, straw, and grains of sand within the heart. In addition, one should follow the regulative principles and not desire illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, or meat. To give us practical instructions, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu cleansed the temple twice. His second cleansing was more thorough. The idea was to throw away all the stumbling blocks on the path of devotional service. He cleansed the temple with firm conviction, as is evident from his using his own personal garments for cleaning. What did he use for cleaning? Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to see personally that the temple was thoroughly cleansed to the standard of clean marble. So this is a very important point because we have to take personal responsibility for cleansing the heart. And so we were saying the other day that in opening the door to Maya, Maya comes in through the door, we let her in. It's not a matter that... And she comes in first through the door of pride. If I become proud, I open the door to Maya. And then if I become lax, that's what invites her to come in the house. And she could sit down. It's like, that's okay. You could sit here because I won't be affected. And then, after one's lax, one begins to justify one's laxity and one's allowing material desires to stay in the heart. And that justification allows Maya to stay as a permanent resident in one's house. She then becomes one of the family. So here, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used his own cloth to personally see that none of these material none of these grains of sand could stay. So we have to take personal responsibility to make sure that these anarthas don't stay. Clean marble gives a cooling effect. Devotional service means attaining peace from all disturbances caused by material contamination. In other words, it is the process by which the mind is cooled. The mind can be peaceful and thoroughly cleansed when one no longer desires anything but devotional service. Even though all dirty things may be cleansed away, sometimes subtle desires remain in the mind for impersonalism, monism, success, and the four principles of religious activity, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. All these are like spots on a clean cloth. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also wanted to cleanse all these away. By his personal activity, last paragraph, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu informed us how to cleanse our hearts. Once the heart is cleansed, we should invite Lord Sri Krishna to sit down, and we should observe the festival by distributing prasadam and chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to teach every devotee by his personal behavior. Everyone who spreads the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepts a similar responsibility. The Lord was personally chastising and praising individuals in the course of the cleansing, and those who are engaged as acharyas must learn from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu how to train devotees by personal example. The Lord was very pleased with those who could cleanse the temple by taking out undesirable things accumulated within. This is called anartha nivritti, cleansing the heart of all unwanted things. Thus, the cleansing of the Vinecha Mandir was conducted by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to let us know how the heart should be cleansed and soothed to receive Lord Sri Krishna and enable him to sit within the heart without disturbance. Noteworthy, again, the Lord was pleased with those who could cleanse the temple by taking out undesirable things accumulated within. This is called anartha nivritti, cleansing the heart of all unwanted things. This is what really pleases Krishna when one surrenders and takes personal responsibility to clean the heart. And such a person becomes a hero, because as mentioned by Rupa Goswami in the beginning of the Nectar of Instruction, Vacho Vegam, Manasa Krodha Vegam, Jihva Vegam, Udaro Hasta Vegam, Etan Vegam, Yogi Shaheta Tira, Sarvamapi Mampriti Nasisha. That a person who is able to overcome all the urges of the senses. How many urges are there? 6. Quite a few. Starting with? Tongue. So there's the tongue, the belly, the genitals, mind, anger, words. These are Vegas. And also, as I probably described the other day in the verse, Kamadinam katina katita palita durnideshas, they're described as bad masters. And as soon as you try to control them, you'll notice that they don't agree to everything. You say, we're going to do it like this, and they say, no, we're going to do it the other way. And so, Pritivim Sishya means that one who is able to control these urges becomes the spiritual master of everyone in the world. Because the real spiritual masters, the real masters, bad masters of this world are the senses. Everyone's controlled by the senses, from the king down to the little squirrel. Squirrels are definitely controlled. I watched one yesterday. and people who are like squirrels, they have to scurry all over the place just to follow these urges, which are dictating, go here, go there, run up the tree, now run down the tree, run across this way. And therefore, one who can control these urges becomes a master for everyone in the world. And without that, it's not possible. One's simply being dictated to by the senses. So one becomes a great hero. And in fact, Prabhupada mentioned when the devotees first went to India, there were thousands of people who would come out and worship the ground that they walked on. In Navadvip, when the Western devotees went dancing down the road, people came out and they collected the dust where they had walked, and they smeared it over their bodies. And in Surat, there were huge festivals where people would come out and garland devotees and offer them artik and so forth. And Prabhupada said, because you're following the 4 regulative principles and chanting 16 rounds, you become worshipable and famous all over the world by this. It's not an ordinary thing to control the senses. And so this is noticed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's an active cleansing process, and one has to carefully identify the weeds. Now, we talked about how this is a process, and the shlokas we chanted this morning mention how Krishna helps from within the heart, and by hearing and chanting, gradually the pushings of the senses, the demands of the senses will decline, and the anarthas will also be cleared up by Krishna's grace. And what are some of those, so we can identify them? It's mentioned how Ado Shraddha Tata Sadhusamrita Bhajana Kriya. It is mentioned, I say that, it's mentioned in the Nectar of Devotion, in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that there is a step-by-step process of improvement in devotional service, leading to the highest stage, which is prema. So first of all, there's faith, and then after faith, one comes to associate with devotees. And when one associates with devotees, one then takes up the practice of devotional service. And when you practice something, are you good at it when you start?
No.
Are you bad at it when you start?
Yes.
What have you practiced that you were bad at when you started? Anyone?
Cooking.
Cooking. What else? Driving. Anything else? Playing guitar. So when you start off, no one wants to hear your guitar playing, right? They'll say, please do it in the other room. And there's all kinds of mistakes we make. So there's 2 stages to the practice mentioned by Rupa Goswami, and that is there's unsteady practice and steady practice. So one precedes the other. So he talks about how there the tendencies or the qualities, characteristics of unsteady practice. And one of them is called utsaha-mayi. In the very beginning, this utsaha, you know the word utsahan, nishchayadarya, from the Nectar of Instruction. Utsahan means enthusiasm. So utsahan-mayi means a great enthusiasm to show one's advancement in devotional service before one's actually advanced. Like a child who goes to school, who learns a little bit of alphabet and then thinks he's Shakespeare, and goes around boasting how he knows everything. Or someone learns a little piano and then thinks he's a maestro, and becomes very proud of the fact. So oftentimes, neophytes, they become like this. Utsahan-mayi means they're overly confident in their practice of devotional service. And then there's Vyuda Vikalpa, which means that, actually the next one is Ganatarala. Ganatarala means thick and thin. So it means one day I'm all in, and I'm gushing with taste and enthusiasm for my practice. And the next day, meh. Not so interested. Everything going the other way, thick and thin. Then there's Vyuda Vikalpa, which means the inability to keep my vow. One day I say, from now on, I'm going to read the Shikshashtakam every day, and I do it for 3 days. And then 6 weeks later, I realize, boy, I did it for 3 days, and now it's 6 weeks later, and I haven't done it since then. Very difficult to keep. And then Vishara Sangha, which means that one has to struggle with the senses. The senses harass one at certain times. And one is noticeably dragged away from one's practice because of the senses. That is next is let me go to the last one because I can't remember the second to the last. Last one is Tarangarangani, which means that when one begins to get success in devotional service, is advancing, then he or she becomes an attractive figure, and people begin to offer respect to such a person who's controlling the senses, and then one can become carried away by the respect that one's getting. So these are some of the symptoms of someone who's unsteady in devotional service. And then, very specifically, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in the Madhurya Kadambini says that there are some persistent obstacles from moving from unsteady devotional service to steady devotional service. And the first one is called laya, or sleep. And it means the tendency to sleep while Bhagavatam class is going on, or while one's chanting, or when there's some hearing process. It's just really fascinating because how that happens, why that happens. There's this collective conspiracy against the sincere soul who's trying to listen. All the senses say, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to go to sleep now. They're such rats that they won't let me stay awake and actually listen. And if someone said, no, I'm really tired, you're not really tired. If someone came in and said, your car's getting towed, you'd immediately wake up. If someone came in and said, your grandma called, she just left you $1 million, you'd immediately wake up and run around the room. So it's not a matter of tiredness, it's a matter of this all-pervasive quality of the material world, to sleep, to not be interested. This is the characteristic of the material world, to be in ignorance or ignorance. I'm ignoring Krishna, and I've so practiced it for so long of ignoring Krishna that when the katha starts, when the bhajan starts, when the grounds start, and then they fall asleep. And this is one of the persistent obstacles from coming from anishita bhajana kriya, which means unsteady practice, to steady practice. And the next persistent obstacle is called vishepa. And vishepa means distraction. The tendency to become distracted, not to be able to concentrate on the matter at hand. For instance, I'm chanting Hare Krishna, and then the mind zings me. You ever get a zinger? Some presidents get them when they sleep even. The zinger comes in. He's like, I forgot to pay the electric bill. And there's a distraction. You're chanting Hare Krishna, and then all of a sudden some thought comes into the mind and then just pulls you off the road, and you can't concentrate on the chanting. This kind of distraction that takes me to the computer, it takes me to look out the window, it takes me here, it takes me there, to look at anything else but the holy name. This is one of the persistent obstacles, and this is a symptom of unsteady devotional service, anishita bhajana kriya. I'm not steady yet because I'm still distracted. Then comes a pratipatti. And that means there's no sleep. I'm not tired at all. And I'm also not distracted. And there's no distraction anywhere near me. But I just don't care. The bhajan starts, and I'm not interested. For no reason at all. Just uninterested. A pratipatti. And then comes kashaya, which means that there's innate tendencies that I've acquired from associating with the material world since the time immemorial. And some of them are anger that comes up sometimes. I'm angry. And sometimes I'm lusty. And sometimes I'm envious. Or all the time I'm envious. And these are obstacles which block us from the steady practice of hearing and chanting in devotional service. And then last comes rasasvada. Rasasvada means that the senses still have this taste for their material objects. So they're always requesting me over and over again, I want some more of this, I want some more of that, I want the object of my senses. However, by the process of continuous devotional service and avoiding offenses in chanting Hare Krishna, if one continues the process and hears Srimad-Bhagavatam every day, then the Shastra says Nashka Praisho Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Vishniki. That these tendencies that I just mentioned, are destroyed practically to nil. Practically to nil means they're still there. There's some trace of them there, but then the next verse confirms Tadaraja chanting in the devotional service. And all the other persistent obstacles then lose their sway over me. And I actually start to come to this position, which is very important in devotional service, called Nishta. One has to come to Nishta. This word Nishta, you consider in English the word stand. It comes from this Sanskrit, shta. Shta means to have a place to stand. It means to be able to stand somewhere. And Nishta means you've got both feet on the ground and you're standing in the right place. When you're unsteady, anishta means you're out of balance. And you're also standing in the wrong place, so you're getting pummeled by material desires all the time. But when coming to Nishta, it feels like I have 2 feet on the ground. I can actually now fully embrace the process of devotional service. And from there, one can make progress to getting ruchi, or an actual positive taste for devotional service, and asakti, which means attachment, and bhava, or this preliminary stage of love of God, where actually, this is described in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that a ray of the internal energy of the Lord enters one's heart, and it melts the heart, and then one begins to actually taste one's relationship with Krishna in the most marvelous way. And then from there, for those who are very, very fortunate, they can come to prema. But for those who are sadhakas, they should be very much concerned with coming through the process of anartha nivritti and coming to this platform of nishta and steadiness. And it doesn't get done by sloppy devotional service. If one isn't careful to avoid offenses, if one doesn't identify anarthas within one's heart and try to remove them, then one can go on chanting, as we say oftentimes when we recite the 10 offenses of the Lord, for millions of years and not come to the perfectional stage. Om Tat Sat. Now we'll take some reflections or questions. Yes.
It's a question sent by Tara Mataji. She's hearing us online, so I'm going to read her message. Prabhu, you mentioned about trying to get rid of material desires. However, I have also heard that if you suppress them too much, then it can take one in an opposite direction of spiritual progress. But at the same time, we should also exercise not following our senses for material desires. It is our conscious effort. It's a fine line. How should we walk in order to progress in spiritual life? And what's the balance?
Yeah, that's true. It mentioned that if you severely restrict the senses, it's like damming up water. And when the dam breaks, a lot more damage is done, actually. And Krishna, in the 11th canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, talks about yogis who try artificial means to control their tongue. He says sometimes people will fast for long periods of time. But then he says after the fast, the tongue comes back and demands twice as much. That you starved me, now you pay. You pay back, and so forth. So the process of controlling the senses means to follow the 4 regulator principles carefully and engage in the positive activities of hearing and chanting, and to be balanced, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, yukta hara viharasya, yukta chestasya karmasu, yukta swapnabhavodasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. Means, and Prabhupada quoted this verse frequently in answer to this kind of question that Tara just posed, and that is that one should be regulated. One should regulate the senses and according to one's ability. So yuktahara, viharasya, that we have activities of eating, we have activities of sleeping, and we have to recreate ourselves, recreation. So those should be done in such a way that it's not too much and it's not too little. In other words, it says a yogi should not eat too much and shouldn't eat too little also. You should eat just what you need. So you have to become expert in that. In fact, one of the qualities we read, one of the 26 qualities of a pure devotee is he doesn't eat too much. He doesn't overeat. Because it doesn't want to affect the senses adversely. So you have to find a way to balance the two. And often it's in relationship to your service. How much do you need to perform your service steadily? I've seen devotees, I mean, you've seen a lot over the years of attempts to take bigger strides in reining in the senses. One devotee in particular, I remember, who slept only 4 hours a night, every night. But as soon as, and he was not allowed to drive a car, by the way, because as soon as you get behind the wheel, he'd immediately fall asleep. And as soon as we'd sit down in Bhagavatam class, he'd fall asleep. And in all circumstances, whenever he was sitting, he would fall asleep. And I was thinking, what's the use? What's the use? And so if you need 6 hours, take it. If you need 7 hours, take it. So you know when you wake up, you're refreshed and you're able to do your service properly. But then if you sleep too much and you become, you wake up drooling and ghostly haunted and, can't get it together all day, you sleep too much. So you have to regulate these things and see how much sense indulgence do I need in order to perform my service. And Krishna also says that that's different for each person according to their qualification and according to their set of senses. Everyone has a different set of senses, and so you have to find out what they need and give them. I mentioned Swe Swe Adhikarya Nishta Saguna Parikirtita Viparayos Dosha Sat Uvarayot Esha Nishtaya. Krishna tells Uddhava that one should act according to one's adhikarya, one's qualification. And that means, that is a good quality, he says. If you do what you can with what you have right now, properly, you'll advance, and it's a good quality. And he says, Viparayot Dosha Sat, the opposite is true. If you try to do more than you're qualified for, then it's a fault. But then Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, if you try to do less than you're qualified for, that's also a fault. So he compares it to walking up a ladder, and once you get a foot on the ladder, then you feel that your foot is firm, then you can step to the next rung and keep moving up the ladder. So one has to be aware of one's situation in devotional service and how much one needs and whether one's taking too much or too little. Another question?
You have one. Go ahead. You got the mic.
Thank you, Prabhu, for the amazing class. Well, I just have a comment and a question. Comment is, when I heard the verse, immediately reminded me of the bhajan, the prayer by Bhaktivinoda Thakur and many other acharyas where they lament and they really talk in the same way that I'm really sinful, and so it was nice to the connection with the shastras, because I always wonder why they feel of course they show the humility, but just wanted to mention that. And question is, with this verse also, and in so many places, it refers to mind and cleaning the mind, and in the purport also I see that it's like cleaning the heart and the mind. Is it interchangeable? How should I think about the two? Is there really difference, or I should just consider the same Chaitanya?
Well, it's called generally chitta.
Yeah.
Chitta means consciousness, and sometimes they're divided due to the Sankhya, consideration, counting all these, various categories. But in general, they're together. Consciousness. The mind, the heart, say cleansing the Chetu Dharpana Marjanam, we're cleansing the Chitta, which is the mind and the heart.
Similar, same.
Yes.
I actually have kind of two questions, but maybe you can intertwine them. One is the situation for, say, myself or an individual may be sliding and slipping down. How can you know that's happening? What material desires or what cause the fall down are there, like you're blinded. And the other is you may see in others, especially maybe close friends or even family members, this cycle coming, that it's you're headed downward spin, and it's rather difficult to talk to them about it or give them a heads up or maybe,
So what's the question?
Does that make sense? First, how do you know which, go ahead.
Hold it.
Okay, how do you know which material desires or things that you're cultivating? Of course, so for the individual himself or herself, how to know that these things are coming. And then with others also, if you, are here seeing where they're having difficulty.
Prabhupada says in one place that one should keep one's eyes trained to spot offenses. So you have to train yourself. That's why we're hearing these things. When we hear about them, the different kinds of material desires that Prabhupada's mentioning, the subtleties of them and how they can, like he mentioned, I'll to start doing business to improve my devotional service, and then that can morph into something else, and I become lost in it. So we have to be vigilant, first of all. And of course, it's almost a contradiction in terms because it indicates that if I'm slipping, I'm not being vigilant, so what to do then? We have to keep in good association those who will instruct us by their example and also chastise us or correct us. But that presupposes that we're sincere, because oftentimes people slip away because they want to. They start to slip away because they become uninterested in performing devotional service anymore. So in various ways, they circumvent the process, and then gradually they're swept away. So how to help somebody who's slipping away, like a family member or something like that? Sometimes by talking to them and trying to help them, but other times in letting them go through the cycle, because sometimes there's nothing you can do for them really. Unless they're submissive and they're interested in improving, oftentimes people take your instruction in an adverse way. And I've seen it with devotees who are not interested in advancing in devotional service and slipping in their practice. They don't want to hear instruction, or they don't want to be corrected in any way. And for devotees who go through that, sometimes what happens is they go out of devotional service for some time and then are purified by Maya herself, because then they have to taste it for themselves. Sometimes they think, oh, I was happier in my material life and devotional service is so much trouble. Because of offenses in my chanting and towards Vaishnavas, there's a way in which my desire for devotional service can wane. And if one becomes sloppy also, it can wane. It's mentioned by the acharyas that it's just like if you work for an employer and you keep showing up late every day, and pretty soon he might just lock the door on you and you don't get in. And then see how you like going without a paycheck for a few months, and then he might let you back, and then you'll appreciate it. So sometimes devotees slip away from devotional service on their own, and then they get punished by Maya, and then they want to come back afterwards. Generally, in the association of devotees, we should set a good example, and if we can keep the vibration going, it's very important, because people could be helped by that. This is a good, simple principle. If you have a community, if you have a family, or for yourself, God helps those who help themselves. And Prabhupada said, helping oneself means putting oneself in front of transcendental vibration. So if you feel yourself slipping away, somehow or other claw your way across the floor, and then get in front of the transcendental vibration, and somehow or other turn it on. Because even though the mind, as Prahlad Maharaj is saying here, is unwilling, if somehow or other you can overcome it through the intelligence, and you need to cultivate the intelligence, and this is mentioned by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Indriyani pranyahur indriya paramanaha manasastu parabhudir yo budhe paratastusaha. Lowest of all are the senses, above the senses of the mind. Above the mind is the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul. And then he says, Evam buddhi parambudva samstat yat manamatmanam. Jahi shatru mahabao kamarupa darasadam. Conquer the lower self by the higher self. Because the lower self may have a revolution, have a coup d'etat, and say, we're going to take over now, we're going to go have a gallon of ice cream, or worse. I mean, and the intelligence could come in and then say, no, that didn't work out last time, and besides, you have to control the lower self or the higher self. And the way to keep the intelligence clarified is to continuously hear. You have to put yourself in front of transcendental vibration. And for family members, you have to arrange times, be the example and be the vibration yourself. And in a community, you have to make sure, like, how will my community thrive? It's practically impossible to keep a community together in Kali Yuga, practically impossible. Because people have so many, they're harassed by desires, they're harassed by the government, they're harassed by their family, they're harassed by everything. And so to keep everybody together in one place and happy and everything's very difficult. There's only one way, and that is if there's this medicine of the vibration, the holy name, and there's actual genuine purification going on. In our community, I always think about, we have this sort of experimental community out in Mountain View, California, in Silicon Valley, where practically everyone works and lives outside. I don't know, it's maybe normal other places too. From the very beginning, I think we have less contact time than we used to in the old days. Back when Prabhupada started the ashram and the temple system, when we would come together, everyone would be there for Mangalarti, everyone there for Bhagavatam class. Throughout the day there's service, and there were other classes in the daytime. There were nectar devotion classes and Sri Upanishad classes, and then in the evening everyone would be back together in the temple room, everybody. Kamali?
And we wouldn't be late either.
And you'd never be late. And everyone was there, all day long, hearing and chanting. And so there's a way in which you can get some traction. But I was reading in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya's instructions to Sanatana Goswami. He said, out of the 64 items of devotional service, 5 are particularly potent. And that includes hearing Srimad-Bhagavatam, worshiping the deity, associating with devotees, living in the holy Dham, and chanting Hare Krishna. So in our community, I thought, well, at least, and then he says, they're so powerful that even if you don't have faith in them, but you have a little connection to them, still you'll make advancement in devotional service. So in any community, if you make sure that the devotees are in contact with these 5, at least.
What to do with that?
First of all, you got to know what envy is, and it's defined by Jiva Goswami as the inability to tolerate the eminence of another. And Queen Kunti says that Shrinvanti Gayanti Grananti Sadhava. One of the processes of devotional service she mentions as being particularly powerful is appreciating the devotional service of others. You can appreciate the way back to Godhead. So, it's an actual practice. You have to consciously replace one with the other. Appreciate envy comes, you have to replace it with gratitude or appreciation for another. Find something, somewhere you can appreciate that devotee and see, the good in them. Just like once in Kuliyagram, a Brahmana came and fell like a stick before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and admitted that I'm a blasphemer of devotees because I'm envious of them. For so long I've said vile things about your devotees. So what should I do now? And Mahaprabhu said, this vilification is like drinking poison, but when you glorify the devotees, it's like the antidote for the poison. It rectifies it. So I've found that if I try to, when I feel envy, that I think of something to appreciate about the devotee. Whatever you appreciate, appreciates. And that is a sort of antidote. Could be helpful.
And what about when devotees are envious of you? What do you do?
Well, Prabhupada says in the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that one should not become one's enemy's enemy. Don't become your enemy's enemy. So if someone becomes your enemy, then don't reciprocate. Don't get caught in that cycle because it gets, swept away by it. So what do? I tend to remain neutral. Somebody wrote a long letter criticizing me and saying, I'm wrong about this and wrong. And I wrote him back and I said, it's really interesting that we both studied Prabhupada's instructions and listened to all his lectures and have been practicing Krishna consciousness, and then we ended up with different opinions about how to do it. Isn't that interesting? And thanks for writing me. Actually, he wrote a public letter, and I wrote back to him a personal letter and just said that. And I didn't stick my foot in it because it's a tar baby.
Probably you made through the class the point about doing what your adhikar is. I had a question related to it, and maybe that's around not having a full understanding of the word adhikar. Because sometimes we get to a comfortable spot in our devotional service. I think most of us go through that cycle that this is what I'm comfortable with, this is what I know how to do. So I'll just do what my abilities or level or something like that is. But then it's also said that empowerment begins from the time you do what you don't know how to do, and then you know what to do and you do it, kind of thing. So I was just having a little difficulty maybe understanding this. If you can help understand, like, should we not every once in a while try to do a little bit more, improve a little bit more, or be at the adhikar, same as like material skills or some professional skills that we acquire, or something else?
Yeah, we should always be hungry and humble. Humble that we're able to do anything at all. We consider it's not my power, but it's coming from Krishna. Whatever service I'm doing, He's empowering me to do. And then hungry to do more. And I gave the example that Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave, and that is climbing the rungs of a ladder. When your foot is firmly on the ladder rung, and you feel confident there, then you could step up. So you should keep moving. So he said that it's a fault to not move up if you have the opportunity to. And we should always be trying to make incremental improvements in our devotional service. There's never a point at which my devotional service is good. I'm good. Okay now. A Mridanga teacher once told me, he said, once you think that you're finished, you're finished. And so devotees never think like that. They're always thinking, how can I improve, how can I improve? And if you think, and partly, the Sankirtan movement is so nice because we have unlimited scope for expansion. There's no point at which we got it covered. We got the whole city covered, or the whole country. There's so many other things that we have to do. So we should continuously look how we can improve, but responsibly take up what the next step is, realizing that I can take another firm step. And oftentimes those come in tiny little opportunities. And Prabhupada gives the example in the Gajendra Mokshana that if you're losing energy, if you're becoming weaker by the situation you're in now, you should re-examine it and make a shift so that you can be steady. And there are different phases of your life in which you may need certain kinds of engagement. And so you have to look and see that I'm doing this, I'm becoming weaker, I'm losing altitude. Now talk it over with advanced devotees, your authorities and everything like that, and try to find a place where you can steadily engage in service. If you're losing altitude, if you're actually losing energy from doing it. You should be feeling like you're gaining energy from doing it, and your capacity is growing. And if that's not happening, you may need some adjustment. And it requires a lot of adjustments. Prabhupada went through, periods of adjustment in his life when he was a grihastha, then he became a vanaprastha. He was looking for some service to do, and he was going around seeing where he could serve. And you can see from his letters that he's asking questions about how to do service, what he should do, and so forth. And he took advice from different godbrothers. He obviously was, soul searching, how to move forward. So we have to be very astute and keep re-examining what is my position and reinvent ourselves on a daily basis. Make sure that I'm okay. Yes, sorry for waiting.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I have two questions in one. So, how to put myself into a situation when I can start experiencing my anarthas, and then how to properly identify them, because sometimes I may see them, but then next day I forget about this. So, how to properly identify them so I can work on them.
In good association, they become more apparent when we're around those who are more advanced than we are. Therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that we should always we should seek association of like-minded devotees that are more advanced than we are. And we can also give them permission to point out our anarthas. That's actually what's called a guru-disciple relationship. That's what it's meant for, that entering into that kind of relationship, because you feel like I can't do this on my own. Therefore, I need somebody that's more advanced than me where I give them full permission to correct me. Because it's very rare that anybody can take correction in this world. As soon as you tell somebody, put down the kartals, they'll be traumatized for life. Next lifetime, they'll have this, I can't pick them up because someone told me to put them down in the kirtan. People are very sensitive, very hard to take criticism. So you have to consciously put yourself under somebody who's more advanced and say, look, I know I need to make advancement. I know I have faults, and therefore I'm coming to you, and I'm going to surrender. I'm taking shelter. That's what take shelter means. You have qualities I want. Now, you please look after me and you tell me what I'm doing wrong. And Prabhupada mentions in the austerities of speech, in the Bhagavad Gita, that unless you have that relationship with somebody, it's not your duty to go around correcting everybody. So, for an advancing devotee, you want to put yourself in that situation. That's what humility is. And even if it's not like, a guru-disciple relationship, you find mentors that can help you, and you say, would you help me? Would you tell me what I'm doing wrong? Please look at me, observe me, and chastise me. And if you can do that, then you can advance very quickly. And it's highly recommended in the Shastra, this process of putting yourself under somebody who's more advanced. Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai, Bhakta-vrinda ki jai, Anarthas, boo. Prabhu ki jai. Gaura Bhakta-vrinda ki jai.